Okay, cool. So we are live. We'll give it about 2 more minutes and then I'll go ahead and get started. And I do have a couple of like live examples that we'll walk through, and my hope is that I can open it up towards the end, just for any questions if anyone has questions. You both can see my screen, okay? Correct. Like the recruiter's lens, decoding job descriptions. You can see that, okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Just want to make sure. Thank you. All right, I'll get us started in about 1 more minute here. Hello. Hi, Mandy. Hi, Lucianne. Thank you all for joining. Hello, hello. I'm going to get us started here in just a moment. I just want to make sure, Lucianne, Mandy, you can both see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful.
I can. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, I don't know what that noise is. Uh-oh. I think somebody's... Sorry, do you guys hear that? I don't know where that's coming from. Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. There'll probably be a couple more people hopping on here at a certain point, but I want to be mindful of everyone's time. And the goal here by the end of this is I want to be able to answer questions that might come up. But I just want to kick off with the decoding of job descriptions is a really, really big topic that I'm hearing coming up from a lot of different people. So I figured it would be good for us to just sit down and have a conversation. And I'm presenting this from the lens of myself having been in the recruiting seat, but also in terms of conversations that I'm currently having with recruiters in my network and how their teams are evaluating based on applications that they're receiving. And then from the lens of conversations that I have been in with hiring managers specifically. So first and foremost, I just want to ask, and feel free to put into the chat here, for all of you that are here, how do you all feel about analyzing job descriptions? Do you feel confident when you're analyzing job descriptions? Do you frequently have questions? Do you question whether or not you are fit for roles that you're seeing? Just if you can give me just a few words in the chat on how do you feel about analyzing job descriptions when you're applying for roles? And don't be shy. Anything come to mind? If not, I can chat. Okay. Usually question whether I'm a good fit for the role or not. Do you typically find that you have a clear understanding of what the company's asking for? Or do you tend to find that you have a lot of questions about what is actually being asked for from me as a job seeker for this role that I'm applying to? Depends on the job description and how they're, okay, that's a good point, Julie, how they're written. Yes, that's a big one. Yeah, so, and anyone else, feel free to put any comments in the chat, but what I will say in terms of the biggest themes that I hear from people is I don't know how to analyze a job role when I see a job description. Lucianne, you just called out a good point. Sometimes they're very clear, sometimes they're generic sounding, and then it becomes when you're submitting your resume, on the other side of it, a lot of people, hear, hey, you have to tailor your resume for the jobs that you're applying to. And that part of it can be challenging when it's hard sometimes to decode these job descriptions, because what we're essentially up against is three different areas. We have some sort of applicant tracking system. So you're submitting your application into a company's ATS. And I would say probably about 95% of companies at this point is using some sort of ATS. There's a lot of automation. There are still companies that are manually reviewing applications, but it's hard to know which companies are actually doing that. Then you have the recruiter / hiring manager, and then you have, recruiter / HR professional, and then you have the hiring manager. So there's three different audiences that you are essentially trying to write for. So I just want to go in and talk about some tips, talk about what the breakdown in the anatomy of a job description. Mandy just called out everything starts to sound like the same thing, and sometimes it's vague, not clear what the job actually looks like. That's a good call out as well. And then transferable skills and interpretation of fit. Yes. So let's get into it in a little bit more detail here. I'm going to move over to the next slide. So why does this matter when we think about decoding job descriptions? The first thing that I want to call out before we look at the anatomy of the job description is that companies on the hiring side, normally job descriptions are going to be written by either the recruiter or the hiring manager, like recruiter / HR or the hiring manager. And where there tends to be some discrepancies when we think about job descriptions versus what companies are actually hiring for is in these conversations that recruiters or HR teams are having with hiring managers, because a lot of times they are listing requirements for the role, but what also is going into these conversations that you guys are not privy to and cannot see is that behind the scenes, there's conversations that is being relayed to maybe a recruiter that is not necessarily listed in the job description, or they list the job description and it's very vague. So it's hard to know, how do I tailor my resume because I can't actually see and understand what they're hiring for, or it's so long and descriptive that based on all of the check boxes that they have, and you're reading through and you're like, hey, I'm not checking every single box, so I feel like I don't meet the qualifications or I can't apply. Like there's a lot of variables here when it comes to the job descriptions, but at the end of the day, the job description a lot of times is your first touch point with the company, unless you have somebody that you know that works at the company, or you get direct inbound messaging from a recruiter or hiring team member. This is going to be your first point of contact. So when recruiters and hiring managers craft job descriptions, there's a few things that they're looking out for. Yes, it's the requirements for the role, but they're also trying to focus on priorities that the company has. They're trying to hire for not just the role requirements, but culture add. So is this person going to be a good fit for the role? And there's sometimes even changes and challenges that the company is experiencing that they are actively talking about in these job descriptions. Or if you're able to read in between the lines of the job description, you can kind of get a gauge and feel for what certain language within a job description actually means for you as the job seeker and how you should be interpreting that. So when we look at for you on your end as a job seeker that is actively applying to job roles, we want to pay attention to what is actually required for the role versus what would be considered wish list items, because sometimes we'll see these really lengthy job descriptions and you're just like, what are they actually looking for? And typically that tends to be a mix of the requirements and the wish list combining together. So what do you actually need to pay attention to is what we're going to focus on here. And I'll actually show you, someone's funnel to show you somebody who recently landed an offer, how they kind of approach that on their end. But I want to go into the actual anatomy of the job description so we can understand just a high level overview of what job descriptions typically, in terms of structure and flow, what they look like. So I'm sure you guys all know that normally when you look at a job description, there's some sort of opening paragraph, which is considered the hook. This is going to be about the company. This is going to be, they're singing their praises and talking about, what they do well, or how they have this exciting new opportunity, whatever it actually, is that they're putting into that initial opening paragraph. A lot of times that's fluff. But for you as a job seeker, that is something that typically you're not going to need to pay as much attention to, because there isn't any content in there that actually is going to be relevant to your application, to your resume. So that's something where I say that part of the job description at the beginning, and we'll look at this in a little bit, will be something that you can pretty much bypass. Then you're going to go into the core responsibilities. So typically, from the way that I have worked with people and how I have seen people review job descriptions, a lot of times people are jumping straight into the minimum requirements for the role, what's required and what's preferred, versus reading through the job descriptions. And when I say that, starting at the core responsibilities, or starting, sometimes there's a secondary paragraph under that initial opening hook where they talk about the team that you'll be supporting. They'll maybe call out that this is a new role. This is who you're going to be reporting directly into. This is the product that you're going to be focusing on. That could be really good information to know. So I would say if there is a secondary paragraph outside of the initial hook, just double check to make sure that there isn't anything there that you need to see. And I'll show you an example of this here momentarily. But then going into the core responsibilities, those are going to be parts of the job description that I would recommend reading. And the reason why is because this is typically going to tell you what you're doing or what you will do day to day. And this is where I say pay close attention here, because these are typically tied to deliverables that you're actually going to be held accountable for. And then when we go into below the core responsibilities, we have the requirements, and normally there's going to be the required versus the preferred qualifications. This, yes, is going to be the most critical, because basically when you're looking at a job role, you want to make sure that you're able to say, yes, I meet these core requirements. Or when we see preferred qualifications in today's job market, there are a lot of times where those preferred qualifications are actually requirements, but they're labeling them as preferred. So it's a matter of how do I distinguish, and we'll look through a couple of examples together, what's actually required, what's actually preferred, what's non-negotiable, where is there maybe room to flex. And this is where you want to pay close attention to that requirement section, so you can decipher how to analyze your experience against the job role. And then when you're deciding if you should apply, there's going to be two kind of avenues that we want to look at. We submit a cold application into a company's applicant tracking system. We also then may look at, well, maybe this is an opportunity where I actually want to try to go outside of the normal application process, which then becomes more of the networking angle, which is more time consuming. But if it's a role that you're really excited about and you really want to do everything within your power to put your best foot forward, you may decide that that might be the route that you want to go. So we'll get more into that here shortly. But one thing I will say is that for people that are applying to roles, sometimes people think that they have to meet 100% of the job description in order for them to be able to meet the quote unquote requirements. This is something where it's very, not rare, but a lot of times people are not meeting 100% of the requirements and they're getting hired on. It is more so, from what I have seen in the hiring space, is if you are able to tailor the messaging and connect the dots from your experience to what it is that they are actually asking for and hiring for in the role. So if you are someone who is in maybe the education sector and you are trying to pivot your experience into ed tech, and you are trying to go into, say, a customer success role, well, then you are going to need to be able to take your experience in education, and you need to be able to use their language, their terminology and skills, and help them see how what you have done in your existing role is actually relevant to what they're hiring for. And you may not meet 100% of the checklist items, but if you can tailor your narrative and make it clear that you understand what it is that they are hiring for, you're going to have a higher probability of getting moved forward into the hiring process versus taking a resume, say for a teacher, And if that's what your role was, a teacher, and you're applying to a customer success role without any sort of edits, but you know that you can do the job, you're not going to get move forward in the hiring process, because they are not able to see that your experience is relevant, because they just maybe don't know what it is on a day-to-day basis. As a teacher, what are you doing? Kind of who are your stakeholders? What tools are you using? But you're taking this resume that you've written based on your current experience without tailoring the messaging to where you're trying to go next. Or maybe you are in marketing and you are trying to stay within marketing, for example, but a lot of your marketing experience has been in digital marketing, but you want to maybe go and pivot into events, and you have done some events in your experience, but that may not have been the core focus of your marketing experience. But what you still want to make sure is that you're showing clearly the events that you have had the opportunity to work on and participate in. Because if you're applying to events role, but you're using a digital marketing resume and everything is digital marketing focused, they're not going to move forward in the hiring process, because they're going to prioritize the people that have either the direct experience or can show them and connect the dots for them how they have done some of the elements of what they're hiring for, and they can clearly articulate that. Because these recruiters, these hiring managers, they're skimming. A lot of time they're skimming through, especially on the recruiting side, they are skimming through, depending on recruiter and how well they know the role profiles that they're hiring for, and how thorough they are. A lot of times they're spending 6 to 10 seconds doing an initial screen and review of your resume before they decide if they're actually going to spend time in the details or not. So if they're not seeing the events, like for example, we'll just use the most recent one, events clearly listed on your resume, if they're not seeing that you have managed events and what type of events you've managed, so was it in person, was it virtual, was it hybrid, if they're not seeing those key words in your resume, they are going to move on to someone if it's a resume that just only talks about digital marketing, because in their mind, it's not relevant. Could you do the job? Yes, of course. I'm sure you could. Could you learn? Yes, I'm sure you could. But when they have an upwards of 200, in some cases 300, 400 plus resumes that they're looking at, they're going to filter and screen by what stands out to them. And what stands out to them is if you're able to connect the dots in your resume for them. So I want to pause before I move to the next slide and just see if anyone has questions that I can answer. Let me go back to any questions. Okay. Okay, feel free to drop any questions as you have them, or like raise your hand or whatever, just so I know that if I'm answering questions as they come up. But I'm going to move forward to the next slide here, which is the non-negotiables, because I want to really talk about the non-negotiable part. So that way, when you're reading job descriptions, you can understand where non-negotiables come into play. And that's really where you should be focusing it on, is what are the true requirements for the job, which is going to be the skills, the experience, the knowledge that in the mind of a hiring manager, recruiter, like that in their mind means that you will not be able to perform the role effectively if you're not meeting the core requirements for the role that they're hiring for. So these will be considered the deal breakers for the hiring manager. And typically, as you're looking at job descriptions, where this comes up, and so I have a few just like tips on how to identify non-negotiables, is you're going to see this come up multiple times. So typically there's like maybe 2-3 times throughout the job posting or more where you're going to see that come up in the job description. That to me is a non-negotiable, or you need to be talking about it and making sure that that's in your resume somewhere. If it appears like early in the requirements list for the job, or it's part of the job title itself, a lot of times that's a core indicator that that becomes a non-negotiable for the role. And you need to make sure that in your resume that you are showcasing that either in the title or in your experience section, or it might be a specific skill, and that's in your skills section. So you want to make sure that you're clearly highlighting that there. Specificity. So Typically, if it's very, very specific, like maybe there's certain tools that they want to make sure that you're using, so they might call out those tools, and they might say, I'm so sorry, I'm getting all these notifications right now. Hold on, because I thought I muted my notifications. Okay, there we go. So they might call out specific tools or systems. And so if you're seeing that they are saying specifically that they want somebody that has Salesforce experience, and that's coming up, you're going to be using Salesforce as part of this. We want someone that has an understanding of Salesforce. Like, then you need to be able to have that in your resume. Or if you haven't used Salesforce, and you've used a different CRM, so client relationship management tool, then you might want to call out the tool that you have experience with. And then in parentheses, then maybe you put that this is similar to Salesforce, so that they know that this is a tool that you're using, but this tool is actually similar to Salesforce. Or if they're saying they want someone that is able to like build dashboards or close deals, write RFPs, which is around, proposals and so forth. Like, those are going to be things, if they're specifying that and clearly writing that out, then that's probably something that you want to have in your resume, because what that means is that it's either going to get flagged at the ATS level, the recruiter level, if they're skimming for words, and then in the hiring manager's hands, they're going to know what they're hiring for, but they're probably going to be looking for some of that language as well. So we want to make sure we have that, if of course, provided you have that experience. And then the context part is like what's connected directly to the core function, job functions or outputs. So if you don't meet these requirements, then what happens is that you're more likely than not going to be screened out early in the process. And that's where, if you are trying to, say, pivot your career and you don't meet maybe some of these requirements, then that's where you want to have a section where maybe you have projects, or you have like upskilling where you've done trainings on some of these like systems or tools or functions that they're asking for, because that's going to help at least draw visibility to the resume and show that you recognize and understand that there's a need, and here is how you are proactively trying to position yourself for the role based on what they're looking for. Or in the cover letter, for example, that's another place that you can do that. So if you're trying to put your best foot forward, then in your cover letter you can include that. But more times than not, the resume is going to be where you want to have the most pertinent information, just because we know that there's going to be an applicant tracking system, most likely we're going to have the recruiter screen and then probably the hiring manager review. So a few examples that I have here, I already covered a couple of them. It's just like the specific tools or systems. So Salesforce, SQL, Figma, Python, Adobe Creative Suite. These are all very specific tools. Then when we think about the deliverables, in the job description, they might talk about building dashboards, writing communications, closing deals, developing marketing campaigns, managing vendor relationships. Like, those are going to be things that they're probably going to be looking out for. And then the industry knowledge is like, if you see in the job description where they specifically say that they're looking for someone that has experience with financial compliance, FAA regulations, like those are examples of actual industry specific knowledge that if you don't have that, but they're listing that as a requirement, more likely than not, you are going to get screened out just because it is listed as a requirement for the role, or they are listing that in the actual core responsibilities, where you are going to be someone that is specifically owning and managing the healthcare privacy regulations, looking for somebody, maybe that has healthcare background. Like, they'll give you some signals to help you understand like how strong of a need it is. So how they're describing it in the job description will tell you, and we'll look at a job here again momentarily, and we'll walk through an example. But this is just high level when we think about non-negotiables, where I would recommend, some tips on how to determine what truly is a non-negotiable and what are some of the true requirements. Any questions here before I move forward? No. Okay. Okay. All right. So a couple of real examples. And actually, I'm going to switch over here to someone's pipeline. And I want to show you someone who recently got an offer. Okay, so all right, perfect. So I have this here. So want to just kind of walk you through this person who is a product manager slash project IT project manager slash in the technical world Scrum master, and essentially that was their focus in terms of the type of roles that they were applying to. So they recently got offered and accepted a role, but where I want to bring this example up is that there are 3 roles here that are in interview stage. 2 of these roles, this person cold applied for the role and landed the interview. One here where you can see based on the person's kind of score, because this acts as an applicant tracking system, this person actually had to network their way in to land the interview because they had initially gotten rejected. When they submitted their application, they were able to find somebody that worked at the company, and the person submitted their resume to the hiring manager, and the hiring manager wanted to interview them. But then when we look at, just kind of based on the score of this person's resume, like I can understand, why they initially got rejected. It's just because the resume did not catch in the applicant tracking system, and it got automatically rejected before it got into the hands of the hiring team. So why I share this with you, and when we think about the non-negotiables, I actually want to look at one of these roles real quick together, so that way I can kind of walk you through, based on what I just described to you in the last couple of slides, what this would look like in terms of how we're evaluating someone's experience and against the job role, that they're applying to, and how you should be looking at yours. So I'm going to share this link actually in the chat. So give me 1 second so you all can pull it up on your end too. Give me 1 second. Let me know. Okay. And just let me know if you're able to open this, if you can. If not, you can just look at my screen. I'm going to switch my tab over here. Okay. Are you all able to see the job description on my screen? Yes. Okay, thank you. Appreciate it, Lucianne. Okay. All right, so either you have this job role pulled up on your own, or you are looking at my screen. So this is a role that this person had applied to and submitted their application into the applicant tracking system. And this is for a project manager role. And so when we look at this role, I just want to walk through some of the kind of the anatomy of the job description, and then also where some of the actual non-negotiables are and why, so we can look at this live in real time. So here, as I stated, when you look at the job description, this first section is the about section. So this is the fluff section. This is the hook. This is basically US Bank talking about themselves, and what, why they're a great company. And then we have the actual job description itself. So this is the part where we want to start paying attention to. And the reason we want to start paying attention to this is because even in this first section here, as we're looking at the job role itself, there's a lot of information here, but what it does say is that here they talk about that they're seeking a dynamic and experienced project manager versed in multiple project management disciplines. So this is a good clue to signal to us, based on the requirements and what they're looking for. They are looking for somebody who has experience working on multiple projects and across multiple disciplines. And that is important to know, because if somebody is new in the project management field, this is probably going to be a role where they're going to get declined, because this is a direct ask, and this is coming up very early in the job description. Then we're going into the ideal candidate. So this is going to be another signal. So if you're seeing the ideal candidate and then a list of things that they're looking for, that's something I would pay attention to. And so in this case, they want someone that has strong agile frameworks, this person is going to be responsible for leading cross-functional teams, mapping customer journeys, and ensuring iterative delivery of projects. So what that tells me is, because they're saying that this is part of the ideal candidate profile, these are things that should be in the resume. So we should have something, whether it be in the skills section about agile frameworks, we should have cross-functional teams in the skills, or even talking about how, in the bullet point, how this person is working with cross-functional teams, and maybe even listing out a few of the teams that they work with. We should talk about mapping customer journeys somewhere, and then we should talk about project delivery, because this is something that they're calling out here. And so that is something that's not actually in the, maybe in the requirements, the qualifications part, because when we look at the basic qualifications, here it says the basic qualifications is that the person needs to have a bachelor's degree and 8 to 10 years of experience in project management activities. So if we're going strictly based on that, then that is not going to be a good signal of like, how do we need to actually tailor a resume? What is the company actually looking for? So that is why it's important for us to pay attention to this part of the role as well, alongside the key responsibilities. Because now when we look at the key responsibilities, they're talking again about managing projects. So again, this ties back to the initial job description section. They're talking about a second time saying the agile methodology. So here they say agile frameworks, but now here they're saying agile methodologies, which is the same thing. So that's coming up at least twice in the job description. So I know that that's important. And if this is not in the resume, this person most likely is not going to get moved forward in the hiring process. They're also talking about journey owner. Well, we also saw here customer journeys appear. So this is the second time they're talking about journey ownership. And then they're talking about mapping and optimizing customer journeys. So we're seeing that come up again. So that tells me this is really, really important. And this is something that needs to be in the resume. Then we're looking at the collaboration with cross-functional teams. Well, that was up here as well. They talk about collaborating with cross-functional teams up here. And here they actually say leading cross-functional teams. So I would probably say in this case, we would want to focus more on the leadership part, because if they're looking for someone with 8 to 10 years of experience, they want someone that knows how to lead cross-functional relationships. And then they call it again, the successful delivery, project delivery. So we're seeing this come up multiple times, which tells me we need to have this. They're talking about agile again. That's coming up again. So these are, just a few more bullet points that go more into the day-to-day kind of key responsibilities. So these would be good things to incorporate either into your, if you have an opening statement like career profile, career snapshot at the top of your resume, or if you have a scope of roles. So some people will have, before they go into the actual bullet points, to show their key business impact in their bullet points in their experience. Above that, they'll have a scope of role to show, hey, here's high level what I'm responsible for. That could be a good place to incorporate that. But these are going to be things that are going to be looked for in the actual resume, because we're seeing a lot of this come up here. And then we're seeing a lot of this come up here in the key responsibilities as well. And then going into the basic qualifications, we already talked about that. So the basic qualifications, which are the minimum qualifications, don't really tell us anything, because except for this person needs to have 8 to 10 years of project management experience. So where we're going to read in between the lines here and really focus on is going to be up here, and then going into the preferred skills as well, and then proven experience. So these areas here are telling us what it is that they're going to be evaluating against. So they want someone, that has considerable knowledge of assigned business line or function. So they want basically someone that has worked within a very specific function, whether not necessarily at US Bank, but within whatever role in project management that they held previously. So someone that has consistency in a singular business line or functional area. So that's the domain, what they call domain expertise. They want someone that has management leadership skills. So, well, that goes back up here where we read, where they were talking about leading cross-functional teams. So that's where the leadership aspect now is being called out down here. The organizational and analytical skills, those are pretty standard, like most companies want you to have organizational analytical skills, advanced knowledge of project management, like that's a given based on the 8 to 10 years of experience, based on what they were describing earlier. And then some of the other kind of words here that they have about the data analyzation, written and communication skills. And then here they just kind of go back into some of the stuff that they've already called out. But when we look at the proven experience part, I would tie this into actually the basic qualifications, because if they're saying proven experience, that tells me that this is a non-negotiable. You need to be able to show them that you have experience in these things that they're asking for. Because if you're not showing that in your resume, you are not going to get moved forward in the hiring process. So pay attention to language like that, because that is going to be something that is going to tell you, and when we read in between the lines, what is important to the company and how they're going to prioritize people that they're going to move forward in the hiring process versus not. But just the last couple of things here is that, again, we're seeing a lot of repetition down at the end of the job description. And then they call out familiarity with lean principles. And then they even have down here certified Scrum Master, CSM, or similar agile certification. So if this person has either of those, that would be something I would want to make sure that we are calling out in the very beginning. We're not waiting until the second page of the resume. We're not waiting until the end of the resume. We're making sure that that's visible, whether it be in the person's name and their title, so the person's name and then comma CSM, or in their opening statement, certified Scrum Master CSM, because it's something that they're actually calling out as a plus for this person to have. So when I look at the job description and going back to some of the non-negotiables, this, tells me like I'm seeing a lot of repetition in what they're asking for, and also seeing that there, some reading in between the lines when we think about looking at things like, hey, proven experience in project management. Well, that means like it's not saying it's a basic qualification, but to me, I read this as like this is something that's a non-negotiable. And then what are the perks? Well, if you're certified, then that's a perk there. So any questions about like the job description, the breakdown, just like as we're kind of going through this based on what I just talked about a few moments ago on like more of the non-negotiables, and as we think about the anatomy of a job description, is this all stuff that is there any feedback? I just want to see where everyone's mind is at right now.
I think for me, what I get out of that, particularly Erica, is that for someone with my background, I see myself as more of a generalist, so I don't have those specializations or in-depth experiences that, while I've had exposure, I just don't have the depth of knowledge because I've been a generalist. So my range is broad, but depth is shallow.
And that's a good call out. When you've done a lot of different things, and then say, for example, like a role like this where they're saying, hey, we're looking for someone that has 8 to 10 years of experience, which, let's say you do, but then they're like, hey, we want someone that has very specific experience within one function, one business line, and say you have that range versus like maybe that depth and that one singular space, then that from that end, it becomes, well, how do I either tell the story? Because maybe you have done some of those things within each of your roles that you've held previously, and so you need to show them that experience. Or maybe it just becomes like, this may not necessarily be the best role for me to apply to unless I'm trying to network my way in, or I'm just more so shooting my shot. So that's, essentially where you can make that distinction of how you want to approach the application, for that job.
I think also too, it's clear to me that bigger companies are going to get very specific in terms of the specificity and methods versus smaller companies, which they don't go there. And at least that's been my experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, that's a good call out that you make. And at the end of it, it's like really going through, and I think just being able to know what you're getting into when you think about, the job description and the companies that you're applying to, the size of the company, but then also just being able to analyze the job description itself and understand, like, hey, what are these hiring teams trying to tell me? And if it's a role where maybe the job description is very vague and there's not as much detail, well, that might even be a flag. Like, if you guys can't even write a clear job description, do you even know what you're hiring for? So it's like being able to read in between the lines, just is this a good fit for me as well? I think that would be the other call I would make there. So, but I want to move into a few more things here. So the negotiables, and so I'm going to flip back into the actual document here so we can talk a little bit about that. So one of the things that I do like to call out is negotiables, because we want to know, like, what is something that companies might actually be flexible on, versus like these hard requirements where it's very clear that, if I don't have this, then more likely than not, I'm probably not going to move forward, or I need to differentiate myself or network my way in. The negotiables part is more of the nice to have qualification. So some of these are going to be nice to haves, but the company actually may list it under preferred or nice to have, but it becomes hey, this is actually a requirement. So we'll talk about some examples of what that looks like. But then there might be some actual nice to haves where it may not be essential to performing the core function of the job, but if you do have these things, it is going to set you apart from other people who are applying that may just meet the requirements, but you're differentiating yourself because you do have these additional qualifications that you're able to speak to, that you have in your experience, that other people that don't have it are probably going to be filtered out. And because you do, you're going to be considered more likely for the role. So how you can identify what those non-negotiables, what those negotiables are, if they're only mentioning it maybe once in the job description, typically these are found at the end of the requirements list. Languages where they say, preferred, nice to have, familiarity with, those tend to be more so on the negotiable side. If there's vagueness, so like if they're describing general and rather than specific terms, then that could be a good way for you to know, like, hey, this is going to be something that's more negotiable. So some of these are going to be like in the soft skills where they talk about like highly collaborative, excellent communication, passion, for sustainability, detail oriented. So it's not that they're not looking for that, but if you're not necessarily listing that in your resume, for example, that's not going to be a deal breaker, because in your actual bullet points, they're going to be able to tell by how you're describing what you do if you are someone who is highly collaborative, if you do have good strong communication, if you are detail oriented. So you don't necessarily have to spell those things out for them. And so that's where I say that that's more of a negotiable, because sometimes people will think that they have to list those things and call them out, but it's more about the examples that you're actually giving in your resume. Or if they ask for specific year requirements. So if they say something like, maybe 5+ years of experience, then if you have really, really strong background, so like if you know that you meet the requirements for the role and you check all the boxes, and maybe you have 3 years and not 5 years, that may be something that's more negotiable because you're actually meeting the requirements for the role spot on. It's just a matter of how are you explaining what it is that you have done in your career to show them that you meet the requirements, versus the role that we just looked at prior to this, which was saying 8 to 10 years. That is a very specific number. So that's going to tell me, because they're being so specific about the years that they're asking for, that they're more likely going to be very strict on the years requirements. And they're either going to be looking for someone within that 8 to 10 year mark, or someone that maybe even has more than. So maybe someone that has like 10+ years would be their ideal candidate. And part of that is because when we look at the job description, and I'll just go back here really fast on the years of requirements, they're very specific here, 8 to 10 years of experience in project management activities. But then they also talk about the leading a cross-functional team. So that tells me that they want someone that has experience in leading teams cross-functionally. But then they also talk about this person is going to, they call out here, they want an experienced program manager versed in multiple project disciplines. So that is telling me that they're not going to be as flexible as, say, if they were to call out maybe 5+ years of experience, and they were to say, hey, we're seeking a dynamic project manager versed in multiple project management disciplines, and it's not specifically calling out experience, then I would say that may be a situation where they'd be more flexible. But paying attention to the language, the words that they're using to describe their need is important, because that'll typically tell you how important something is or not, and whether or not it's flexible. Any questions there? No, okay. Let me flip back here. Okay, so back to the previous tab that I was just on. The last thing here is like niche tools. So sometimes companies will ask for tools where they might say familiarity with Confluence, for example, and maybe you don't have familiarity with it, but you, going back to like maybe you've used a similar tool and you have that listed, then that could be something where, you know, if it is a tool that they're looking for, you could probably learn that on the job, especially if you meet all of the other requirements for the role. So one note just to make, and I included it on the bottom here, is that a lot of times companies will inflate their experience requirements by 1 to 2 years as a filtering mechanism. But they will, you know, happily interview candidates that have less experience who demonstrate proficiency with the non-negotiables. So I just want to make that, you know, part really clear, unless it's a clear ask and they specify that they need somebody that has a certain level of experience. And then just kind of going more into some of the language and job descriptions, a lot of times they have a lot of like fluff in there, and I'm sure you guys have already, you know, seen this come up in job descriptions where if they use certain phrases like, you know, rockstar, ninja, wizard, guru, fast-paced environments, you know, wearing many hats. So paying attention to those type of terms is going to be important, because if they are looking for, say, rockstar, ninja, wizard, guru, well, you can expect that they're most likely going to expect you to take on more and have really high levels of standards for performance. And then there may, and I would say there'd be more of a possibility where there's going to be more limitations around the resources or support that they have. Or if they say fast-paced environment, like they might have really tight deadlines, or they might have priorities that are constantly changing because maybe, you know, there's not alignment on what the business need is. So they're shifting priorities all of the time, or this could mean like, hey, this is going to be like long hours. So that's where you want to just make sure that you are being really, really cognizant of like how they're describing the role, because especially if you are looking for a certain working environment, sometimes the job description can give you the signal into what you can expect. You know, if they're saying that this is a startup environment and they're calling that on the job description, well, then you know that there's going to be very limited structure, that the processes are still being developed, that there's going to be resource constraints. And if you're someone who thrives in an environment where there's structure, where you have a clear role defined for you, that's definitely going to be a situation where it's probably not the best environment. So there's a couple of examples here, and I shared this presentation out previously, and I'll share it out again, but just want to call out some of these like typical phrases that tend to come up: wearing many hats, work hard, play hard. So just be on the lookout for those, because it may not like disqualify a position, but it does, for you as the job seeker, help you assess the fit and then also prepare for what potential challenges there might be. So you can also use that too, especially if you're looking for the right culture fit for you, to craft interview questions to make sure that you're trying to peel back layers to understand what does the environment actually look like. So that's where you can bring in some interview questions to help you decipher if it's the right environment for you. Okay. And then a couple kind of additional notes here in terms of like bringing this all together, and like how to really think about decoding a job description. I typically tell people you want to break it into role, skills, and then context. And then the role is going to be the core function and primary deliverables. So we kind of walk through an example of a job role. And so some of the questions is like, what are some of the outputs that I'm responsible for? Can you gauge like what are metrics maybe that will measure your success? And some of times they'll clearly outline that in the job description. What problems am I solving? When you're looking at skills, you want to look at the technical and the soft skills required. So which of these skills are non-negotiables, which are negotiable or able to be learned. And if it's able to be learned, is it a situation where, you know, I proactively maybe take a training to learn it and so I can list it in my resume? And then where do I have transferable skills? And then with the transferable skills, then it becomes the actual example based on your transferable skill that you might need to put into your resume in terms of bullet points to show that experience that you have. And then the context is going to be the environment and the circumstances. So some companies are very strict on industry knowledge. So if you don't have the industry background, they won't consider you for the roles. And you typically are able to tell that because they will very, very explicitly call out must have, you know, knowledge in the healthcare space, or must have knowledge in the gaming industry or in media or in the tech industry. So if they're saying that you must have this industry knowledge, then that's going to be a situation where more likely than not, that is going to be a deal breaker, unless you can build a really strong case. And most likely, I would say, when I say case, you will probably need to look in the direction of the networking versus cold application, because they're probably going to prioritize people that have industry. So industry is a big one. And then the team and structure and support, and then the company culture and pace. So when we think about alignment, if you have strong alignment across like all three areas when you're reading a job description, then that's most likely going to be a really great fit, which most likely means that you have a higher, of course, probability of getting into review/interview stages. But if you are strong in maybe role and skills, but maybe weak in context, so maybe you don't have the industry knowledge, you can probably succeed in the role. But when it comes to the actual review of the job and the evaluation of your experience against the movement into the interview process, that's where you would probably maybe see challenges, because if the company is and the hiring team is being a stickler on that requirement, then you most likely will not get moved forward. But if you have, you know, strong context and skills, but then maybe your role in terms of they're looking for someone that's more experienced. So to the example that I shared with the project manager role, but you are someone that is earlier in your career, or you're trying to make a career pivot and you're moving from a completely different role into a role that you've never been in before, that's going to be where you have to, you know, just understand the job description and know that there's going to be certain jobs where it is a non-negotiable for them in terms of the level that they're looking for and the roles that they're hiring for. And then that just might mean, hey, you have to do more networking, or again, you shoot your shot, but just knowing that if you don't get moved forward in the hiring process, most likely that's going to be the reason, you know, why. And so once you can start to look at these job roles and really take a step back and analyze, how am I reviewing the job descriptions, understanding what it is that they're actually asking for. If we're seeing, you know, say vagueness in the job roles that based on the job description, then you may need to do additional research, or that may be one where you're like, hey, I'm not going to apply because that actually is a flag for me if they can't write a solid job description. So those are going to like be the ways that you can start to decide and decode what is going to be best for you to apply to, and then what companies are actually looking and vetting for. And then I have a case study in here, you know, that I include. I know we went through a job description already. So I'll share this one with you guys so that way you guys can go through the actual job description and the non-negotiables versus the negotiables, because I know we're running up on time here. And I do want to leave a couple minutes for questions before we hop off. And then, here's the full kind of view of the job description, but I'll share this with you guys so you guys have it. So I wanted to see if there's any questions here in the last couple of minutes that we have before we hop off that I can answer specific to your scenario if you have a question. Okay. And if not, is this helpful? Is there anything that I can clarify just in general about job descriptions if you don't have a question about your specific scenario?
Not a question, just appreciate you kind of clearing away some of the dust or muddiness from reading some of these things.
Yeah. I know it can be overwhelming going through job descriptions and then you're like, I can do the job, but then it's like, oh, well, we're not moving forward in the process. And, there's a whole kind of behind the scenes that goes on. So hopefully that this gives you a little bit of clarity and just some tips on like how to navigate as you're looking at different job roles.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then coming up next, I will be doing a workshop more so on networking, outreach, because one side of the job search is applying to job roles, of course, and submitting applications. But then the other side of it that a lot of people talk about is like networking your way in. But what does that even look like? And what are some strategies there? So that'll be coming out on the calendar here in the next couple weeks. All right. Well, if that is it and nobody has anything else, I will make sure that this is shared out. Most of you probably have it, but I'm going to post this in the community as well. But I'm very grateful that you guys all joined. Thank you for dialing in, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. And Lucienne, I will see you shortly.
Yes, thank you, Erica.
Okay, thank you. Take care. Bye, everyone.
Thanks. See you next week.
Yeah.